Hello, dear literature enthusiasts, and welcome back to Frame Shift. It's always a joy to sit here with you, knowing we share a love for stories that don't just pass the time, but linger in our bones, demanding we think about them long after the lights have come back on. Today, I've chosen a film that, on the surface, belongs to the world of blockbusters and popcorn thrills, yet for me has always lived in that fragile, sacred space where myth, tragedy, and philosophy overlap. The film is Avengers, Endgame, 2019. Before we dive in, I'd like to gently ask, if you find yourself moved, curious, or challenged by the reflections we'll be sharing, consider liking this video and subscribing. It's never about numbers here. It's about building a circle of readers, thinkers, and watchers who see movies as modern literature, who find meaning in the flickering images that so many dismiss as just entertainment. And let me say it up front, this isn't a review in the ordinary sense. It's a meditation, a theoretical and critical exploration, an attempt to read cinema the way we might read a poem or a novel, lingering on symbols, on character arcs, on what the story whispers about us. When I first encountered this film in theaters, I felt as though I were standing at the end of a very long road, one that I hadn't walked alone. Years of characters, fragments of storylines, small victories, and crushing losses had been stitched together across a tapestry of films, and suddenly, they all converged here. Sitting there, I realized I wasn't watching a single story. I was witnessing the culmination of a myth that had been carefully woven into modern consciousness. It reminded me of the way we treat epic literature, Homer's Iliad, Virgil's Aeneid, or Dante's Divine Comedy. These are not just stories. They're repositories of cultural memory, shaped by collective imagination, filled with echoes of grief, love, and sacrifice. And that's what this film became for me. A kind of secular scripture, a myth for the modern world dressed in capes and cosmic battles. What has always fascinated me about stories of this magnitude is how they manage to juggle scale. On the one hand, this tale is about gods and monsters, intergalactic wars, and stakes that span universes. On the other, it narrows down to a handful of fragile human emotions: regret, longing, guilt, hope. This juxtaposition is what makes it resonate so deeply with me. When I think about my own life, my own struggles, I know I'll never face a titan who can snap away half of existence. But I do know what it feels like to lose, to regret choices, to cling to a sliver of hope even when the world feels irreparably broken. The film's genius lies in how it transforms those universal emotions into spectacle without losing their intimacy. The story picks up in a world already broken. The catastrophe has happened, and the survivors are left to wander among ghosts. There's something almost post-apocalyptic in the way the world is shown. Quiet streets, empty stadiums, an eerie sense of absence more powerful than any explosion. For me, those opening scenes felt like standing in the aftermath of personal loss, when silence is heavier than sound and absence is louder than presence. It reminded me of a time when I lost someone close, and the world seemed to slow down, the air itself thick with grief. I could feel that same heaviness radiating from the characters, and it pulled me in with a kind of empathy I rarely experience in blockbusters. The heroes we've come to know are fractured. Some bury themselves in denial, others drown in guilt, and some chase after vengeance with single-minded fury. Each one, in their own way, embodies a different response to grief. I found myself reflecting on how literature often explores grief as a mirror of character. Think of Hamlet, paralyzed by indecision in the wake of his father's death, or Antigone, defiant in her grief as she fights for dignity. The heroes here are no different. Their powers, their costumes, their mythic stature, they're all stripped down to reveal very human cores. And in that humanity, the story resonates as tragedy. Of course, this is also a tale of daring and reclamation. The survivors realize that grief can't be the end, action must follow. And so begins one of the most thrilling conceits of modern storytelling: the journey through time itself. The narrative folds back on itself, revisiting old triumphs and old wounds, transforming memory into battlefield. Watching these characters step back into moments we, too, had lived alongside them years earlier, I felt the strange sensation of nostalgia, a meeting reinvention. It was like reading an annotated edition of a beloved novel. Suddenly, familiar passages revealed hidden meanings. Footnotes expanded our understanding. Layers of interpretation deepened our connection. The brilliance of this device lies not just in spectacle, but in symbolism. By revisiting their past, the characters are forced to confront the very foundations of who they are. One must relive the failure of not saving his mother. Another must confront the manipulative shadow of a father figure. And yet another must sacrifice the very person he loves most. These moments don't just propel the plot, they reframe it. They remind us that time isn't just a setting. It's a character in its own right, shaping and reshaping destinies. What struck me most was how the film uses sacrifice as its ultimate grammar. Time and again, characters are confronted with choices that demand loss. To gain one thing, they must surrender another. The idea resonated deeply with me, perhaps because I see echoes of it in everyday life. How often do we, too, find that growth requires surrender? To step forward, we must let go. To protect someone, we must sometimes wound ourselves. Literature has always recognized this truth, the idea that sacrifice is the crucible of meaning. From Achilles' choice of glory over a long life, to Sidney Carton's final act in A Tale of Two Cities, the greatest stories often hinge on this principle. And here, it is no different. The climactic moments arrive with an intensity that's difficult to describe without slipping into awe. A battered, weary warrior stands against impossible odds, shield broken, body failing, yet still ready to fight. For me, that image will forever remain etched in memory, not because of its spectacle, but because of its symbolism. It is the embodiment of endurance, the insistence on standing even when standing seems meaningless. That single moment reminded me of so many figures in literature who refused to yield. Lear raging against the storm, or Job refusing to curse his god despite unthinkable suffering. It's a reminder that heroism is not measured by victory, but by persistence in the face of despair. And then, of course, comes the catharsis. The return of allies, the roar of triumph, the uniting of voices across the battlefield. There is grandeur in those scenes, yes, but also something intimate. When I watched it, I didn't cheer for the spectacle alone. I felt a strange lump in my throat because it felt like witnessing community restored. It reminded me of how, in my own life, moments of despair have been broken not by sudden miracles, but by the quiet strength of others showing up, standing beside me, reminding me that I am not alone. That is what those scenes captured, the return of solidarity, the power of togetherness. Yet the ending refuses to let us leave without tears. Victory comes, but at a cost that cannot be undone. The loss of a figure who has anchored this saga since its earliest days is not just a plot point. It is the fulfillment of a theme that has been simmering all along. Sacrifice again, final and irrevocable. Watching it, I couldn't help but reflect on the ways endings often demand pain. In literature, endings are rarely about tying bows neatly. They are about fulfillment, about the inevitability of consequence. And that is what we receive here, a conclusion that hurts precisely because it feels honest. What lingers after the credits is not simply the memory of battles or special effects, but the themes stitched into the story's heart. Responsibility, sacrifice, grief, endurance, and community. These are not just cinematic beats, but literary ones. They belong to the long tradition of storytelling that has guided humanity for centuries. For me, this film resonates because it reminds me that myths are not ancient relics. They are alive and reshaped in every era. Just as Homer once gave voice to the Greek imagination, this story gives voice to ours. As I sit with these thoughts, I find myself thinking of my own responsibilities, the sacrifices I've made, and the ones I've yet to face. I think about the griefs I carry and how they shape the way I see the world. I think about the communities that have stood by me, the people who have stepped in when I felt too small to continue. In that sense, watching this film wasn't escapism. It was reflection. It was holding up a mirror and seeing my own humanity refracted back at me through capes and cosmic battles. And perhaps that's the final twist. The one that isn't in the script, but in the experience itself. That what looks like a superhero tale becomes, for us, a parable about ourselves. That is why it lingers. That is why it matters. So, as we close this exploration, I want to thank you for joining me in this space where film and literature meet, where spectacle transforms into symbol, and where stories remind us of who we are. If you found yourself reflecting alongside me, if these thoughts spark something in you, consider subscribing to Frame Shift. Here, we aren't chasing trends. We're chasing truth in the flickering shadows of cinema. And I'd love for you to continue walking this path with me. Together, we'll keep peeling back the layers, keep reading movies like texts, keep finding the echoes of our own lives and the myths of the modern world. Because in the end, that is what stories are for. Not escape, but understanding. And there's always more to understand. The world does not end with noise, but with absence. That's the lingering truth that grips the opening frames of this story. The catastrophe has already happened. Half of existence has already been wiped away. We are not watching the apocalypse unfold. We are walking among its ruins. It begins in silence, in a quiet domestic moment on a lonely farm, where a man once accustomed to thunderous battles is reduced to something achingly human. He is teaching his daughter archery, laughter floating in the air, the warmth of family briefly pushing away the shadows. Then, without warning, the girl vanishes into dust. He turns, frantic, calling out for the others. They too are gone. No screams, no explosions, no explanation. Just absence. That moment, stark in its simplicity, sets the tone for everything that follows. From here, grief is everywhere. The remaining heroes are not triumphant figures basking in glory, but hollowed shells haunted by failure. They search desperately for meaning, for a way to undo what feels unfixable. The images of abandoned stadiums, empty neighborhoods, and hushed streets speak louder than words. For me, those moments always sting because they don't look like fantasy. They look like what happens when life, as we know, it abruptly stops. It reminded me of times I've walked through empty places once filled with noise, the eerie sensation that what should be there simply isn't. That dissonance runs like a pulse through the entire narrative. In the aftermath, the surviving heroes begin gathering threads. News spreads of the desolation across the universe, and the team, fractured as it is, regroups. There's an urgency in their search for a solution, a determination to confront the one who caused it all. They track him down to a distant planet, a strange and quiet place where the villain has retreated, broken but still dangerous. They find him alone, scarred, limping, yet oddly serene. He has destroyed the very weapon that allowed him to bring catastrophe, leaving no way to reverse it. His calmness is infuriating, his conviction unshakable. He believes he has saved the universe by reducing its burden. The confrontation is brief and brutal. Rage boils over. Words are exchanged, blows are struck, and in one sudden moment of vengeance, the mad titan's head falls. The act does not bring satisfaction. If anything, it deepens the void. Killing him does not restore what was lost. It only proves how hollow victory can be. Time moves forward but not in healing. 5 years pass, and the silence stretches longer. The survivors scatter, each finding their own way to live with loss. One returns to his family and tries to lead others in group therapy, urging them to move on even as he struggles to do so himself. Another has retreated to the stars, weighed down by guilt and shame. The god of thunder has transformed into a figure unrecognizable, drowning his despair in drink, his once mighty body softened, his eyes carrying the weight of failure. Others continue to fight, not because they believe they can win, but because doing nothing would mean surrender. Their grief manifests differently, but its root is the same. They all failed to protect what mattered most, and then comes the spark of possibility, the flicker of hope that arrives not from gods or warriors, but from a man who once seemed the smallest of them all. Having been trapped for years in a quantum void, he stumbles back into the world by sheer accident. He is bewildered to find years have passed, but in his confusion he sees something the others cannot. time itself could be the key. To everyone else, the idea sounds absurd. To him, it is the only way forward. The notion of a time heist, as he later jokingly calls it, emerges, an impossible plan to return to the moments before catastrophe, to retrieve what was lost, and to undo the damage by rewriting the past. At first, the others dismiss the idea. It seems too wild, too dangerous, too fantastical even for them. But the thought refuses to die. Slowly, cracks of possibility widen. The scientist who once carried the power of a green monster reluctantly admits it might work with enough precision. Yet they know they cannot do it alone. They need the genius who wants to find their victories. But he is no longer the same. He has retreated into a quiet life, raising a daughter, finding joy in the ordinary after years of extraordinary chaos. When they approach him, asking him to risk it all once again, he resists. He wants to protect what he has now, unwilling to jeopardize his family for the chance to undo what was lost. But his heart is not made for turning away. Late at night, tinkering with equations and probabilities, he realizes the impossible might actually be possible. His hesitation dissolves, replaced by determination. The gathering begins. The team, once shattered, starts to reassemble, though not without difficulty. Some members are reluctant, broken by guilt. One in particular has taken his grief and turned it into a weapon, hunting criminals with merciless fury across the globe. When they find him, he is drenched in vengeance, his eyes hard and unyielding. Convincing him to return is not easy, but the promise of redemption, of a chance to set things right, cracks open the shell he has built around himself. The others, too, are coaxed back into the fold. Even the god of thunder, now a shadow of his former self, is persuaded, not by duty alone, but by the faint glimmer of hope that he might reclaim what he lost. Their preparation is meticulous, blending science, strategy, and memory. The idea is deceptively simple. Travel back to specific moments in time, retrieve the artifacts of power before the villain claimed them, and use them to reverse the catastrophe. Yet each mission carries not just logistical peril, but emotional weight. They are not merely revisiting events. They are revisiting their own lives, confronting failures, regrets, and temptations. The time machine itself becomes a symbol, a vessel not just through which they'll travel across years, but through which they'll confront themselves. When they finally embark, the film shifts into a kaleidoscope of memory. They scatter into different moments across their shared history, slipping into iconic battles and quiet encounters, their presence hidden among the echoes of the past. For the audience, it is a thrilling revisitation, a reminder of journeys we, too, have taken with them. For the characters, it is something more dangerous. They are forced to watch themselves as they once were, to face temptations to change things, to feel the sting of wounds not yet healed. One group finds themselves in the midst of a grand city battle, reliving chaos they once barely survived. Another finds themselves face to face with family long gone, forced to reckon with the ache of memory. A soldier sees the woman he never had the chance to love, the weight of what might have been pressing on him like gravity. A son, desperate for his father's approval, encounters the man in a moment of vulnerability, realizing too late the words he always wanted to say. These encounters are not just missions, they are reckonings. They remind us that time is never simply about moments. It is about choices, regrets, and the haunting weight of what if. The missions unfold with tension and unpredictability. Success seems tantalizingly close, yet mistakes ripple outward. At one point, a plan collapses in chaos, and the heroes are forced to improvise, leaping even further back in time to salvage their goal. In another, the presence of the past villain himself complicates everything, as he becomes aware that something larger is at play. His discovery is chilling, for it means that even as the heroes attempt to rewrite history, history itself is beginning to fight back. What makes these sequences so powerful is not just their cleverness, but their symbolism. To reclaim the future, the heroes must confront the past. They cannot simply pluck artifact from time. They must face their own regrets, their own failures, their own longing for what cannot be undone. Each mission becomes a meditation on grief, on resilience, on the danger of meddling with fate. For me, these moments always resonate because they feel deeply human. Who among us has not wished to step back into a moment, to say the thing we didn't say, to change the thing we regret? Yet here, the story reminds us that such power comes at a cost. That time does not let us walk through it without consequence. As the missions draw to a close, the fragments of success are gathered. One by one, the heroes return, battered but victorious, their hands clutching the tools of their plan. They have what they need, or so it seems. The artifact that demands the greatest sacrifice, however, has not yet been claimed. Two heroes, bound by friendship and love, find themselves faced with a choice that will break them. On a desolate cliff, they realize only one can succeed, and success requires death. The moment is unbearable, not because of spectacle, but because of the intimacy of sacrifice. They fight not against the villain, but against each other, each determined to give their life for the other. In the end, one falls, leaving the other broken, clutching the prize that was bought at the cost of love. It is here that the story turns from daring heist into tragedy once again, reminding us that nothing gained comes without loss. By the time the heroes regroup, they are forever changed. They carry not just the artifacts, but the scars of what they've confronted. Some have spoken with ghosts, some have lost companions, some have glimpsed futures they will never have. They return with hands full, but hearts heavy. And waiting in the shadows, unknown to them, is the greatest threat of all, the villain, now aware of their plan, ready to turn their hope into weapon. This is where the story leaves us, on the precipice of triumph and disaster, with hope finally within reach, but danger closer than ever. The journey has demanded sacrifice already, but it whispers of greater sacrifice yet to come. For me, this first stretch of the tale has always felt like standing at the edge of storm, watching the sky darken, feeling the weight of the air before lightning splits it open. It is both thrilling and devastating, a reminder that even in victory, loss is never far away. When the fragments of their journey through time are finally gathered, the survivors return to the present carrying both victory and grief. Their hands are full of the artifacts they sought, but their hearts are heavy with what it cost them to retrieve them. A friend lost on a lonely cliff, a family member glimpsed and then gone again, a lover never spoken to, futures confronted and then stripped away. Their success is tainted, as all true victories are. And yet, the task ahead allows no pause for mourning. What they hold has the power to reverse catastrophe, but to wield it requires courage greater than any battle they have ever fought. The scientist, whose massive green alter ego has long been both curse and blessing, steps forward. He insists the power of the stones is bound to gamma radiation, that his body might endure what would kill the others outright. The moment is tense, a blend of awe and dread. He dons the gauntlet, the metal creaking under the force of what it contains. As his hand closes, light pours through him, agony etched across his face. For a moment, nothing. Silence. The team looks at each other, uncertain if it worked. Then, through a window, the chirp of a bird, the rustle of leaves, the ringing of a phone from someone thought lost. Relief begins to spread, tentative but growing. They did it. They brought back what was gone. But before joy can take root, shadows descend. Missiles tear through the sky, striking their compound with the force of fury itself. Fire and rubble engulf them. The villain has arrived. The truth becomes clear. While they were gathering what they thought would save the world, the past itself was watching. The villain of an earlier time discovered their plan, and rather than let destiny unfold as it once had, he brought his army forward into their present. No longer is he the weary conqueror they once defeated. This version is younger, hungrier, and far more ruthless. He does not see his plan as mercy. He sees it as conquest. And now, he intends not just to balance existence, but to wipe it clean and rebuild it entirely in his image. The compound collapses into ruin, the heroes scattered among fire and dust. For a while, chaos reigns. Each one claws through wreckage, battered but unbroken. The god of thunder, the armored genius, and the soldier with the shield emerge together, standing once more as they had so many times before. They march toward the enemy, who waits calmly on the battlefield. He does not attack. He sits, patient, his massive weapon planted in the ground, as though daring them to strike first. It is not arrogance, it is certainty. He knows they will come, and he knows what he intends to do. The clash that follows is brutal. The three charge him together, their blows raining down with desperate fury. Steel clangs against alien metal, thunder crashes against blade, energy sparks with each strike. Yet for all their strength, he is relentless. One by one, they falter. The god of thunder falls beneath the weight of his own despair, his body beaten. The armored genius is thrown aside, his suit cracking under the strain. The soldier alone rises, his shield shattered, his body broken, but his spirit unyielding. He pulls the fragments of his shield tight against his arm, tightening his grip as though the mere act of standing is itself defiance. Alone, outnumbered, facing an army descending in the distance, he prepares to fight. And then, something miraculous happens. A voice crackles through his communicator, familiar, impossible. A portal opens, glowing golden, and out step allies long thought lost. Another portal opens, then another, until the battlefield swells with figures returning from dust. Wakandan warriors march forward, sorcerers conjure shields of light. Winged heroes soar above, armored suits streak across the sky. The dead are not dead, they are here. The battlefield transforms into a convergence of every story that has come before, every ally rising to stand together. For the first time, the enemy faces not a handful of broken heroes, but the full force of unity. The clash that follows is chaos incarnate. Armies colliding, magic and metal clashing, explosions tearing through the field. Amid the storm, smaller stories unfold. Friends reunited embrace in the middle of battle. Allies fight side by side for the first time. The young hero once thought gone swings back into the fight, his youthful exuberance lighting up even the darkest chaos. The armored genius, relieved and overjoyed, cannot help but pause to embrace him in the middle of war. These fleeting moments of humanity pierce the spectacle, reminding us that victory is not about armies but about people. The villain, however, is not idle. He fights with renewed savagery, determined to seize the gauntlet and complete his vision. The battle narrows around this singular object, this weapon that holds the fate of existence. It passes from hand to hand, each hero carrying it a few steps further before falling beneath the onslaught. At one point, the young hero clutches it desperately, shielded by allies, soaring through the battlefield as hands reach to protect him. The gauntlet becomes a relay baton, passed along through blood and sweat, each moment of survival carved from sacrifice. And then comes one of the story's most stirring images. The soldier's broken shield lies discarded. The god of thunder struggles to rise. And in the chaos, the hammer long thought bound to one man's worthiness lifts into the air, into the soldier's hand. The crowd roared when I first saw it, and even now the memory carries a weight that feels larger than cinema. It was a moment years in the making, a symbolic confirmation of purity, of worthiness. He wields it with grace, striking lightning into the battlefield, reminding us that heroism is not born of power, but of heart. Still, the villain does not falter. Blow after blow, he presses forward, his army surging. The sorcerer strained to hold portals. Allies fall one by one. The gauntlet slips ever closer to his grasp. He dons it briefly, the stones sparking with energy, and for a terrifying instant it seems as though the catastrophe will repeat itself. He raises his hand, the final gesture of destruction poised. But the armored genius, battered and broken, seizes his chance. In the chaos, he grapples with the villain, his suit absorbing the surge of the stones. The villain snaps his fingers, but nothing happens. He turns in shock to see the gauntlet empty. The stones are gone. They gleam now on the genius's hand. He looks at his enemy, voice steady despite the fire consuming him, and declares, "I am Iron Man." With a snap, the battlefield erupts in light. The enemy army disintegrates, their ships crumbling into dust, their weapons falling silent. The villain himself, defiant to the end, fades into nothing. Victory has come, but not without cost. The genius collapses, body ravaged by the power he wielded. His friends rush to his side, tears breaking through their exhaustion. The soldier clasps his hand. The god of thunder kneels beside him. The young hero who idolized him weeps openly. His family arrives, his wife holding back her own grief long enough to whisper the words he needed to hear, that he can finally rest. And with that, his eyes close. The aftermath is quiet. A funeral unlike any other gathers every ally, every survivor. They stand in silence, a community forged in battle now united in grief. A wreath drifts across the water, bearing the arc reactor that once glowed at the center of his chest, the symbol of a man who turned selfishness into sacrifice, arrogance into legacy. The camera lingers on faces, each one carrying the weight of memory, each one silently promising to carry the torch forward. The story does not end only with grief. There are resolutions, quiet and personal. The soldier who has always carried the burden of time itself is given the task of returning the stones to their rightful places. He steps onto the platform, promises to return in moments, and disappears into the stream of time. But he does not return as expected. Instead, when they look again, he is sitting on a bench, older, weathered but content. He chose not to come back, but to live the life he was always denied. In his hands, he passes his shield to another, entrusting legacy not to bloodline, but to worthiness. His journey ends not in battle, but in peace. Others, too, find their own resolutions. The god of thunder, finally free of the throne that always felt like a prison, sets off into the stars to rediscover himself. The archer, reunited with his family, holds them close, never taking for granted what was once stolen. The god of thunder, finally free of the throne that always felt like a prison, sets off into the stars to rediscover himself. The archer, reunited with his family, holds them close, never taking for granted what was once stolen. The green giant, scarred but stable, continues as a reminder of resilience. And the young hero, mentored by the one who sacrificed everything, looks ahead with both grief and determination. The weight of responsibility now his to bear. What began in silence ends in silence. The clamor of battle fades, replaced by quiet images of lives rebuilt. The world, once broken, begins to heal. Yet the story does not give us neat perfection. It leaves us with scars, with losses that cannot be undone, with reminders that even victory carries cost. And perhaps that is why it resonates so powerfully. It refuses to lie about the price of hope. It tells us that endurance, sacrifice, and community are the only paths forward, and that even in loss, there can be meaning. When I think back to the closing images, I don't see only spectacle. I see myth completing its arc, a cycle of heroes rising, falling, and passing on their legacies. A meditation on grief and sacrifice dressed in the language of capes and battles. It is not the end of a franchise or a set of characters. It is the closing of an epic, the modern equivalent of the last chapter of an ancient saga. And like those sagas, it lingers not because of the grandeur of its battles, but because of the truth it speaks about life, loss, and the stubborn flame of hope that refuses to die. At the core of this sprawling epic are not weapons or stones or battles, but people, fragile, flawed, deeply human people who carry the weight of impossible burdens on their shoulders. What makes this story linger is not merely its spectacle, but the way it pauses to show us who these characters are when the armor is stripped away, when the shields are broken, when the thunder dies down, and all that remains is grief, love, and the choices they can't undo. Their arcs form the heartbeat of the tale, and to walk through them is to understand not only the narrative but the philosophies it carries. The armored genius has always embodied contradictions, brilliance fused with arrogance, selfishness tempered by flashes of surprising tenderness. For years, his journey has been about balancing ego with empathy, and here that balance finds its conclusion. When we see him again after the catastrophe, he is a man broken not by defeat alone, but by guilt. He rages against his comrades, his body frail, his voice raw with bitterness. Yet beneath the anger is something deeper, the ache of a man who believes he failed the child he mentored, the people he swore to protect, the billions who vanished because his solutions weren't enough. And then, after time passes, we see a different side. He has built a quiet life, raising a daughter in a cabin tucked away from the world. It is the life he never thought he could have, the life of peace, of family, of ordinariness. His reluctance to rejoin the fight comes not from cowardice, but from love. To risk everything now means risking her. And that choice, that tension between self-preservation and sacrifice, becomes his defining struggle. When he ultimately steps forward to wield the power that will kill him, it is not out of arrogance, but out of love, not only for his family, but for the larger family he has built over years of battles. His arc is a meditation on growth, on how selfishness can transform into selflessness, on how even the most flawed among us can end in redemption. The soldier with the shield represents the opposite end of the spectrum. He has always been the embodiment of duty, of selflessness to a fault, of a man frozen in time, tethered more to ideals than to the messy realities of the world. His struggle has never been whether he will act, but whether he will allow himself to live. When catastrophe strikes, he becomes the one trying to hold others together, guiding survivors in group therapy, urging them to move forward. Yet in his eyes, we see the ache of longing for the woman he lost to time, for the life denied him by destiny. His journey in this tale is not about proving courage, he has always had that, but about reclaiming his own humanity. When he finally chooses to lay down his shield and live the life he always dreamed of, it is both shocking and inevitable. His story ends not in sacrifice on the battlefield, but in the embrace of love long deferred. And in that ending, the tale reminds us that heroism is not only about dying for ideals, but about daring to live for them. The God of Thunder carries perhaps the most unexpected arc. Once radiant with power and bravado, he is introduced here as a shadow of himself, burdened by guilt, lost in despair, drowning in drink and denial. He has retreated into isolation, his once mighty body softened, his spirit shattered by the memory of failing to strike true. He becomes the embodiment of survivor's guilt, of the crushing belief that one mistake defined the fate of billions. And yet, beneath the humor and the self-destruction, his arc speaks to something profoundly human, the struggle to forgive oneself. When he later grasps the hammer and finds himself still worthy despite his failures, it is a moment that transcends spectacle. It is a reminder that worthiness is not about perfection, but about continuing despite imperfection. His journey does not end in triumph, but in release. He relinquishes the throne that always suffocated him and chooses to seek his own path among the stars, a wanderer no longer defined by guilt, but by the possibility of renewal. The Green Giant's transformation is perhaps the most quietly radical. For years, he has been a man at war with himself, two halves locked in endless conflict. Here, however, we encounter something unexpected, a synthesis. He has found a way to merge his intellect with his monstrous strength, becoming a gentler giant, both brilliant and powerful. There is humor in this, yes, but also a strange serenity. His arc embodies reconciliation, the acceptance of one's fractured self, the refusal to let inner conflict define existence. Yet even he is not spared pain. When he wields the gauntlet, his body nearly destroyed by the Force, we see that even peace within oneself cannot shield against sacrifice. He emerges scarred, a reminder that even reconciliation carries costs. The Archer has always been one of the more grounded figures, his struggles rooted not in gods or machines, but in family. And so, when catastrophe strikes, it is his family he loses first. That opening sequence of him teaching his daughter only to turn and find her gone remains one of the most harrowing images in the saga, precisely because it is so ordinary. His grief curdles into vengeance, transforming him into a ruthless hunter of criminals, his arrows instruments of judgment. He becomes a figure consumed by rage, punishing those who lived while his family was taken. And yet, when offered the chance to help restore what was lost, he returns, not easily, not without scars, but because the possibility of redemption outweighs his bitterness. His arc is one of mourning and recovery, of walking through the fire of vengeance, and emerging scarred but softened, a father once more, holding tight to what he almost lost forever. The spy, whose life has always been shrouded in secrets and debts, undergoes her most devastating trial here. Her arc has always revolved around seeking redemption for a past drenched in blood, and in this story, she finds it, not through survival, but through sacrifice. On that lonely cliff, when she and her closest friend realize only one can obtain the artifact they need, their struggle is not against an enemy, but against each other's love. Both want to give their life for the other. Both refuse to let go. In the end, it is she who falls. Her death is quiet as it is profound. For years, she carried guilt for the things she had done. In that moment, she erased them all, giving her life so that others might live. Her arc is not about redemption found in glory, but about redemption found in surrender. The villain himself must also be considered, though this is a different version of him than the one we saw before. Here, he is younger, more ruthless, not tempered by the satisfaction of having completed his task. He sees only conquest, only the reshaping of existence in his image. If the earlier version embodied twisted conviction, this one embodies pure ambition. He becomes not a philosopher of balance, but a tyrant of destruction. In this way, he represents not only an external foe, but the shadow of human desire, the hunger to control, to dominate, to erase and rebuild. His defeat is not only a narrative necessity, but a symbolic one, a reminder that unchecked ambition consumes itself. Even the secondary figures carry weight. The young hero, restored from dust, becomes a symbol of innocence returning to the battlefield, his exuberance clashing against the grief around him. His embrace with the armored genius during battle is not only a moment of joy, but of legacy, the passing of the torch from mentor to student. The Queen of Wakanda, the Sorcerer, the armies of Asgard and Wakanda and beyond, all of them symbolize the strength of community, the truth that victory never comes from one, but from many. Taken together, these arcs form a symphony of themes. The armored genius teaches us about growth from selfishness to sacrifice. The soldier shows us the courage of choosing life after war. The god of thunder embodies the struggle of self-forgiveness. The green giant reminds us of reconciliation within ourselves. The archer reveals the dangers of vengeance and the power of redemption. The spy demonstrates the ultimate price of love. And even the villain reflects our darkest impulses, the hunger for control that must be resisted. What makes this ensemble so compelling is not that they are perfect, but that they are not. Each one is fractured, flawed, defined as much by failure as by success. Their arcs remind us that heroism is not about invincibility, but about persistence, about standing up again, about choosing compassion even when it hurts, about sacrificing even when no one is watching. And in that, they mirror us. For though we will never wield hammers or don suits of iron, we know what it means to grieve, to long, to hope, to forgive, to carry burdens too heavy and still keep moving forward. In the end, the character analysis of this story is not merely an academic exercise. It is a reflection of humanity dressed in myth. It tells us that growth is possible, that sacrifice gives meaning, that grief can be endured, that redemption is never out of reach. Each character is a chapter, and together they form an epic, a living, breathing testament to the power of story to remind us who we are and who we might become. There are stories we see, and then there are the ones hidden in the shadows, whispered across sets, buried in production notes, and carried home by cast and crew as secret memories. To watch this film is to experience grandeur, armies clashing, destinies fulfilled, sacrifices immortalized. But behind the curtain, its creation was something stranger, wilder, and at times even more miraculous than what ended up on screen. The making of this cinematic epic is itself a labyrinth of oddities and curiosities, little moments that reveal just how fragile and improbable a story of this scale can be. To step into these behind-the-scenes corners is to realize that myths are not forged out of certainty, but out of chaos stitched together with human. Will point one of the strangest truths is that many of the cast didn't even know the whole story they were filming. Secrecy wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced with near military discipline. Scripts were printed on special paper that couldn't be photocopied, and most actors received only their scenes, often stripped of context. In some cases, names and objects were swapped for code words. The young actor playing the web-slinging protege was notorious for letting spoilers slip in interviews, so he was given deliberately vague directions, sometimes fed false lines, and even filmed reaction shots without knowing what or who he was supposed to be reacting to. When the portals finally opened in the finished film and armies poured onto the battlefield, his astonished expression wasn't entirely acting. He had been told nothing of the scale. The lengths to preserve secrecy extended beyond the set. Trailers released before the film's debut were doctored, digitally erasing or adding characters to misdirect audiences. In one infamous shot, a lineup of heroes was shown running in a battle, but in truth, half the figures weren't even there. They were inserted later purely to throw viewers off the scent. Editors became illusionists, crafting false versions of scenes that would never appear in the final cut, ensuring even the most eagle-eyed fans could not guess the truth. The climax of the saga brought with it the return of nearly every hero introduced over a decade of storytelling, and the logistics of assembling them bordered on the absurd. Scheduling alone became an epic quest. Actors juggling commitments to other films would sometimes fly in for a single day, film their lines, and vanish again. Some emotional exchanges we see on screen were never filmed together. One actor delivered lines to a stand-in, while weeks later another filmed their half. The two performances stitched together in editing. The magic of cinema made it seamless, but on set, it was often just tennis balls on sticks, green screens, and the faint hope that imagination could bridge the gap. The funeral sequence stands out as one of the strangest stories of all. A single tracking shot glides over nearly every surviving hero, gathered in silence to honor the fallen genius. But for many months, fans speculated whether it was real. The cast themselves joked that it felt like a class photo, an impossible gathering of faces. Yet the truth is that it was filmed in secret, in one take, with dozens of actors flown in under the tightest veil of security. Even crew members weren't fully informed who would be arriving until the day of the shoot. The cast described it as surreal, standing in silence, shoulder to shoulder with comrades they hadn't seen in years, pretending to mourn while also fighting the giddy absurdity of the moment. Then there was the hammer, one of the most shocking moments in the film, when the soldier finally lifts it, proving his worthiness. The secret of that moment was kept not only from fans, but from many cast members as well. During table reads, the script described something vague, avoiding any direct mention. The actor himself had known for years it might happen. Writers had teased the possibility since an earlier film, but when the day finally came, the set erupted in cheers. Crew members, normally stoic, broke into applause, unable to contain their excitement. It wasn't just a twist for audiences. It was a moment of communal triumph for everyone who had lived inside the story for a decade. The God of Thunder's art provided another behind-the-scenes curiosity. His transformation into a heavier, broken figure was achieved not with CGI, but with an elaborate prosthetic suit. It added pounds of weight, forcing the actor to move differently, his stride slower, his gestures less fluid. What began as a storytelling choice became a physical burden, shaping his performance. He described it as liberating, forcing him to act through discomfort, to lean into vulnerability rather than power. Yet the prosthetic also provided unexpected levity. Between takes, he would joke about his new physique, snacking on set with exaggerated gusto, making crew laugh as he leaned fully into the absurdity. The gauntlet itself, so central to the climax, was another strange artifact. Multiple versions were built, each customized for different actors. Some were heavy metal props, others lightweight rubber, others purely digital placeholders. Actors joked that slipping on the gauntlet felt like slipping into myth, as though they were donning the crown of destiny itself. One actor confessed he couldn't stop sneaking photos of himself wearing it, even though phones were banned from the set. He admitted later that he locked those photos away for years, afraid even a stray leak might ruin everything. Strange accidents sometimes created unexpected magic. During one shoot, a line meant to be serious was flubbed, and the actor improvised, twisting it into humor. The directors loved it so much they rewrote the scene to keep the spontaneity. In another moment, a set piece malfunctioned, collapsing sooner than planned, forcing the actors to scramble in genuine panic. That footage was later woven into the final cut, the raw chaos giving the battle more realism than carefully rehearsed choreography ever could. The final battle, the most ambitious sequence in the saga, was itself a patchwork of strangeness. Filmed largely on sound stages, actors performed on bare dirt surrounded by green walls. The epic armies that filled the battlefield existed only in imagination until visual effects teams added them months later. To keep morale high, directors encouraged the cast to treat it like a children's game. Pretend you're surrounded by thousands. Pretend you're standing on the edge of history. They threw themselves into it with such sincerity that when the effects were layered in, the performances felt genuine. And then there is the snap, the second one, the one that ends it all. The line delivered before it, "I am Iron Man," was not in the original script. For weeks, the scene ended silently, the genius snapping his fingers without a word. But in the editing room, the directors realized something was missing. They needed a phrase that tied his entire arc together. Late at night, one of them suggested it. The declaration he had made at the very beginning of his journey, now echoed at its end. The actor returned for reshoots, delivered the line, and a legend was born. That spontaneous addition transformed the scene from powerful to mythic. The funeral, for all its solemnity, carried one of the strangest little details: a boy standing at the back, alone. Many viewers puzzled over his identity until it was revealed he was the child from a much earlier film, now grown. His presence was deliberate, a quiet nod to legacy and memory, tucked into the tapestry as a gift for those who remembered. It was trivia turned into symbol, a hidden thread linking past and present. Even the editing process birthed strange discoveries. In early cuts, certain sequences dragged, others felt rushed. Entire characters were trimmed, arcs condensed, yet somehow nothing essential was lost. Editors described the process as sculpting marble, chipping away until the statue emerged. Along the way, they found odd gems, improvised lines, accidental gestures, moments of silence that spoke louder than dialogue. These became the heartbeat of the final cut, proof that cinema is as much accident as it is design. The global release carried its own peculiarities. Studios begged audiences not to spoil the film, launching campaigns that felt almost like pleas from storytellers guarding sacred myth. Fans responded with remarkable loyalty. In some countries, theaters remained packed for weeks, audiences cheering, sobbing, even applauding at the screen. Videos of these reactions became strange artifacts themselves, reminders that cinema is not only watched, but lived collectively. One of the strangest truths of all is how deeply the cast carried their characters. Many admitted they wept not just during emotional scenes, but after realizing this chapter of their lives was closing. Some kept props, shields, suits, even pieces of rubble, tucked away as personal mementos. Others admitted they avoided watching certain scenes at first, unable to relive farewells they had only just said. The line between fiction and reality blurred, and for those who lived inside the story, its ending felt as real as any other loss. Looking back, what fascinates me is not just the trivia, the secret cameos, the prosthetic suits, the doctored trailers, but the strange alchemy of it all. A film of this scale should have collapsed under its own weight. Secrecy, scheduling, technology, expectation, any one of them could have doomed it. And yet, through improvisation, accidents, and sheer will, it came together. What we see on screen is polished myth, but what existed behind it was messier, stranger, more human. And perhaps that is why it resonates so powerfully. Because in the end, the strangest fact of all is that myths are made not by gods, but by people. Actors sweating under prosthetics, editors reshaping flub lines, crews hiding secrets in trailers, fans keeping faith in the unknown. The film itself is a monument, but its making is a mosaic of accidents and oddities, each one a reminder that the line between chaos and legend is thinner than we imagine. What makes this story endure is not only the spectacle of its battles, but the way those battles are constructed as echoes of ideas. Ideas that reach beyond cinema, into literature, philosophy, and the fragile human experience itself. Every event, every turning point, feels both intimate and colossal, stitched together with meaning. To walk back through these moments is to realize that the film is not simply a conclusion to a saga, but a critical meditation on loss, responsibility, and the resilience of myth. The opening event, when we see the Archer's family vanish into dust, is as simple as it is devastating. No score swells, no explosion shakes the frame. It is silence that crushes us. From a critical perspective, this moment reframes the catastrophe not as cosmic spectacle, but as domestic horror. By showing the absence at the level of a family, the narrative insists that the event's meaning lies not in numbers, but in intimacy. Critics often compared it to post-war literature, how Hemingway or Remarque capture the vastness of war through small, personal details. Here, the loss of a daughter's laughter says more about annihilation than any special effect could. The scene's emotional resonance ripples forward, shaping how audiences read the story, not as a tale of gods and titans, but as a meditation on grief etched into ordinary life. The decision to kill the villain so early in the narrative also carries immense critical weight. Most stories would build toward that confrontation, but here it comes swiftly and it comes hollow. The god of thunder's strike, decapitating the enemy, should feel triumphant. Instead, it is presented as a failure, an act too late, an indulgence of vengeance rather than justice. From a literary lens, this is the subversion of the heroic climax. Instead of catharsis, we are given emptiness. Critics noted how this reframing turned the story into tragedy. The antagonist is removed, but the world is not restored, and the heroes are left adrift. In this way, the film refuses to deliver satisfaction in the places we expect, setting the stage for a more complex, morally tangled narrative. The time jump of 5 years forward is one of the boldest narrative events, and from a critical standpoint, it redefines the tone of the entire saga. Superhero films rarely linger on aftermath. They resolve catastrophes swiftly, restoring the status quo before the credits. But here, the decision to dwell in loss, to show a world reshaped by absence, transforms the narrative into something literary. We see empty stadiums, abandoned boats, therapy groups, images more common in post-apocalyptic fiction than in heroic fantasy. This choice signals that the story is not about spectacle, but about what comes after spectacle, about the way survivors navigate the ruins. Critics praised this move as evidence that the film dared to trust audiences with slowness, with sorrow, with the space to breathe grief rather than escape it. Then comes the spark of hope, delivered by the smallest of heroes returning from the quantum void. Critically, This moment functions as a reassertion of myth structure. Where tragedy lingers, myth always finds renewal. His improbable survival becomes not just a plot device, but a metaphor for resilience. How hope can appear from the most unexpected corners. Some analysts compared it to the archetype of the trickster, the figure who slips through death itself to return with possibility. In myth, the trickster is never central, but always essential, and here his role as the unlikely catalyst reflects that tradition. The time heist itself invites critical analysis as a narrative device. On one level, it is spectacle, an excuse to revisit iconic moments from the saga's history. But on another, it becomes a meditation on memory and regret. Each event within it forces characters to confront ghosts of their past. The soldier glimpses the woman he lost. The armored genius meets the father he never reconciled with. The god of thunder is comforted by his mother. These encounters are not about stealing objects. They are about reclaiming meaning. Critics read this as the film's most literary sequence, a fusion of epic adventure and personal reckoning. In revisiting their own histories, the heroes embody the concept of anamnesis, the act of remembering as a path to truth, a theme as old as Plato. The sacrifice on Vormir stands as one of the most critical turning points. Two friends, bound by shared guilt and loyalty, fight not against a foe, but against each other's love, each trying to give their life for the other. From a narrative perspective, it is radical. A battle scene stripped of villain, weapon, or glory, reduced to two people grappling with the unbearable weight of choice. Critics emphasized how this moment encapsulates the film's meditation on sacrifice. Unlike traditional heroic deaths, this one is quiet, stripped of spectacle, framed instead by intimacy and inevitability. Its resonance lies in its refusal to glorify, to linger instead on the silence that follows her fall. In literary terms, it recalls tragedies where the hero's downfall is not external but chosen, born of love and duty colliding. The gauntlet's reconstruction and the decision of who will wield it is another moment steeped in symbolism. When a green giant volunteers, critics saw more than logic at play. His willingness to bear the pain reflects reconciliation, the synthesis of anger and intellect, destruction and compassion. His act is not only physical but thematic. He embodies the merging of opposites, becoming the one to shoulder what others cannot. The snap that restores life becomes less a victory of power and more a triumph of integration. Critics noted how this echoed Jungian archetypes of individuation, the uniting of fragmented selves into wholeness. But hope is fragile, and the arrival of the villain with his army collapses it instantly. His calm posture as he waits for the heroes to come to him is laden with critical significance. He does not strike first. He simply waits, embodying inevitability. From a critical lens, he becomes less a character than a force. Entropy, ambition, death. His decision to annihilate existence entirely and rebuild it marks a shift from balance to tyranny, symbolizing the escalation of human hunger for control. Critics liken it to the shift from tragic villain to absolute evil, the point where philosophy corrodes into dogma. The soldier standing alone against the enemy's army, shield shattered, body broken, is perhaps the film's most iconic image. Critically, it is the crystallization of endurance. He knows he cannot win, but he chooses to stand anyway. This refusal to yield echoes countless literary archetypes, from Lear raging against the storm to Job refusing to curse despite unthinkable loss. In cinema, it functions as the climax of his arc, not in victory, but in defiance. Audiences across the world cited this as the moment they felt the story transcend entertainment. It was not about superheroes, but about the universal truth of standing when standing seems impossible. The return of allies through portals is spectacle, yes, but also a communal catharsis. From a critical viewpoint, it embodies the theme of community as salvation. The story begins with isolation, families vanished, heroes scattered, and culminates in unity. The visual of armies converging, of voices rising together, resonates not only as fan service but as ritual. Critics compare the moment to liturgical imagery, resurrections, returns, the gathering of the lost. It reminded audiences that no myth is sustained by individuals alone, but by communities that carry one another. The climactic handoff of the gauntlet through the battlefield carries critical symbolism as well. Each hero, holding it briefly, passing it along, reflects the theme of shared responsibility. No single hand can carry the burden alone. It must be relayed, carried together. Critics emphasized how this defied the trope of the lone savior, instead framing salvation as collective. The gauntlet becomes not just a weapon, but a metaphor for responsibility itself. Too heavy for one, survivable only through shared sacrifice. The moment when the soldier lifts the hammer is another critical high point. Years of narrative build-up culminate in a gesture that confirms his worth. From a thematic perspective, it reflects the idea that worthiness is not about strength, but about heart, humility, and perseverance. Critics hailed it as the fulfillment of narrative foreshadowing, a payoff that was both inevitable and surprising. More deeply, it reinforced the film's moral core. That power belongs not to the arrogant, but to the steadfast. The final twist, when the armored genius seizes the stones and delivers his line, has been analyzed endlessly. Critics noted how it closes the circle, echoing his first declaration years before. The phrase, "I am Iron Man," is not only character-defining but metatextual, a reminder that myth always circles back to origin. His death, framed not as defeat but as ultimate growth, transforms him into the saga's sacrificial figure. From a literary angle, it recalls Christ-like archetypes, the one who gives life by giving his own. Yet it is also deeply human, grounded in his love for his family, his comrades, his world. Critics agreed that this moment cemented the film's resonance, delivering both spectacle and emotional truth. The funeral sequence provides critical closure. By gathering nearly every hero in one silent tableau, the film transforms from narrative into ritual. Critics described it as cinematic liturgy, a communal act of mourning for both the characters and the saga itself. The shot gliding across faces is not only about them honoring the fallen, but about the audience saying farewell. Its impact lies in its universality. Grief shared in silence becomes a bond between viewer and film. The soldier's choice to live his life in the past, to embrace love instead of war, carries critical weight as well. From one perspective, it is the subversion of the heroic trope. He does not die gloriously. He chooses quiet fulfillment. Critics debated whether this was selfish or liberating, but most agreed it was fitting, a reminder that heroism is not only about sacrifice but about living truthfully. The passing of his shield to another embodies legacy, the handing down of myth to a new generation. In literature, this is the eternal cycle, the torch always moving forward, never extinguished. When critics reflect on the film as a whole, they often emphasize its audacity. It dared to slow down, to dwell in grief, to subvert expectations. It dared to balance nostalgia with reinvention, fan service with philosophy. Its impact was not only cultural but emotional, creating a communal experience that transcended cinema. Thematic resonance, responsibility, sacrifice, community, endurance transformed it into myth. Perhaps the most critical perspective of all is that the story does not lie. It does not promise that victories erase scars. It insists that hope comes at cost, that grief endures, that sacrifice defines. And in that honesty lies its power. For audiences and critics alike, the film became not only a conclusion to a saga, but a reflection of life itself. Painful, hopeful, broken, beautiful. In the end, the significant events of the story, family lost, villain slain too late, time revisited, sacrifice demanded, communities restored, lives ended and begun anew, form more than a narrative. They form a meditation, a reminder that the true power of myth lies not in the battles fought, but in the truths whispered beneath them. This is why the film endures, why it continues to be analyzed, why it resonates long after the credits fade. Because it tells us that even in despair, there is meaning, and even in endings, there is hope. The story we see on the screen feels seamless, inevitable, almost mythic in its sweep. Heroes gather, destinies collide, and sacrifice shapes the future. Yet what the audience experiences as polished grandeur was born out of chaos, an intricate web of secrecy, improvisation, technological wizardry, and, at times, simple accidents. The making of this epic was a saga in itself, filled with odd detours, unlikely solutions, and laughter tucked between tears. To step behind the curtain is to realize that this film was not only a conclusion to years of storytelling, but also one of the most ambitious gambles in cinematic history. One that required thousands of people, endless layers of planning, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected. From the beginning, the production was built on secrecy, so extreme it bordered on paranoia. The studio knew this was the culmination of over a decade of intertwined stories, and every detail had to be guarded like a sacred relic. Scripts were printed on special, nearly indestructible paper that blurred when photocopied. Watermarks identified which actor held which copy, making leaks traceable. Yet even with these measures, many cast members weren't given full scripts at all. They received only their scenes, stripped of context, sometimes with code, names replacing the real ones. The young actor, known for his exuberant interviews and accidental spoilers, was famously shielded from most of the plot. He once filmed a sequence where he stared at a glowing portal, told only to react with awe. He didn't know until the final cut that he was reacting to the return of heroes once thought gone, stepping in a battle through golden rings of light. His genuine shock became part of the performance, maintaining that secrecy extended even to trailers. Audiences around the world pored over each frame, hunting for clues. But editors deliberately inserted misdirection. Entire characters were digitally erased from shots, while others were added as decoys. In one preview, a lineup of heroes charged into battle together. Except in reality, half of them weren't there at all. Visual effects were wielded as camouflage, ensuring fans couldn't unravel the truth before the film's release. One of the production's strangest and most fascinating challenges was scheduling. With dozens of heroes spanning multiple franchises, each actor carried obligations to other projects. Some filmed their contributions in single-day windows, flying across continents just to record a handful of lines. In several cases, emotional exchanges that felt seamless on screen were filmed weeks apart. One actor delivered his dialogue to a stand-in, while the other filmed his half later, the performances stitched together in editing. The audience saw unity. The reality was fragments. The story begins not in spectacle, but in quiet intimacy. The Archer's farmhouse is a setting drenched in ordinariness. Picnic tables, open fields, a daughter practicing archery in the sunlight. It could be anyone's home, anywhere. That's precisely why it devastates when absence suddenly swallows it whole. The cinematography here resists grandeur. Handheld cameras linger on gestures, on laughter, on the rustle of leaves. Natural lighting washes the frame in warmth, creating a sense of safety. And then, in an instant, dust replaces presence. The farm becomes not just a setting, but a graveyard of absence. Critics often noted how this opening works as a cinematic sleight of hand. It places cosmic catastrophe into domestic space, forcing audiences to feel not the loss of half the universe, but the loss of one family. From there, the narrative shifts to the compound of the heroes, a space we've seen before, but now hollowed. Once vibrant with plans and camaraderie, it now feels sterile. The cinematography emphasizes wide, empty hallways, desaturated tones, and static shots that resist energy. The compound becomes symbolic of the survivors themselves, functional but joyless, stripped of vitality. It is here that strategy replaces hope, where they gather not out of optimism, but obligation. Even the lighting seems to echo this, favoring cool blues and harsh whites that drain warmth from the screen. When they track the villain to his garden world, the setting transforms into something eerie and almost pastoral. The planet is lush, filled with greenery and golden light, but there's something unsettling about its tranquility. Smoke drifts lazily from a hut. Crops are tended by scarred hands. The cinematography leans into natural beauty, but frames it with unease, lingering on the limp of a conqueror, on the silence of a place that should be alive but feels deserted. The setting here subverts expectation. We anticipate a fortress of power, but instead we find a broken god in a cabin. The golden hues that once symbolized warmth now feel sickly, tainted by the knowledge of what he has done. The jump forward in time reshapes the world entirely. The 5-year leap introduces us to spaces of absence. A therapy group gathers in a small, nondescript room, folding chairs arranged in a circle. The setting is deliberately ordinary, reflecting the film's willingness to dwell not in spectacle, but in grief. In New York, we see streets bustling, but with undertones of emptiness. Boats piled near the harbor, stadiums abandoned, cities functioning but diminished. The cinematography employs muted palettes, soft grays and browns, capturing a world that has learned to endure loss without overcoming it. The atmosphere is heavy, the tone elegiac. These settings reinforce that the catastrophe was not just an event. It is a wound etched into the geography of the world. Contrast arrives when the smallest of heroes stumbles back from the quantum void. His return introduces a new setting, a storage unit cluttered and forgotten, his life reduced to boxes and dust. The handheld cinematography again emphasizes intimacy, following his bewildered steps through a neighborhood marked by memorials and silence. Walls filled with names stretch endlessly, engraved reminders of those lost. This setting functions as both monument and wound, cinematic shorthand for the scale of grief. The camera lingers here, forcing us to feel the permanence of absence. The farmhouse of the armored genius offers another tonal shift. Tucked into nature, with sunlight spilling across wooden floors, is the antithesis of the sterile compound. Here, the cinematography glows with warm ambers and greens, framing family life as a sanctuary. His daughter's laughter, the intimacy of domestic meals, the quiet stillness of lake water, all of it conveys peace, but also tension. The setting underscores what is at stake for him. To leave this place is to risk everything. The house becomes symbolic of the life he has always denied himself, now finally claimed, and the cinematography makes us understand its allure. The warmth here is not just visual, but emotional. It pulls both him and us into the comfort of what could be, making his eventual choice to abandon it more devastating. The God of Thunder's new kingdom is one of the most surprising settings. A fishing village turned refuge for his people, built on the coast with ships clustered in harbors. On the surface, it is idyllic, a rebirth of community. Yet the cinematography subverts that potential by introducing it through comedy. The god now reclusive, beer in hand, his once mighty form softened. The setting reflects him, beautiful but diminished. Natural light paints the village in muted blues and grays, a reminder that though life continues, it does so under the shadow of failure. Critics often noted how this setting captures the paradox of survival. Thriving on the surface, haunted beneath. Then comes the sanctum of the sorcerer, a place we've seen before, but which takes on new layers. Its stained glass windows glow with amber light. Relics line shelves, and corridors stretch into mystery. It embodies possibility, a space where rules can bend. The cinematography here is precise, symmetrical, evoking order. But as time travel becomes a reality, the sanctum fractures. Shadows deepen, winds whip through corridors, geometry itself collapses in kaleidoscopic distortion. The setting becomes visual metaphor for what is at stake, order unraveling into chaos. The time-high sequences are where setting becomes kaleidoscope. Each mission takes us into past moments, and the settings chosen highlight both nostalgia and confrontation. The New York of the first great battle returns, but now we see it from another angle. Cinematography captures familiar chaos, the wreckage of streets, the flash of alien metal, but this time with irony, as heroes from the future slip between the cracks of their own history. In contrast, a military base of the 1970s offers muted tones, boxy architecture, and a palette of olive greens and browns. The shift in setting underscores the dissonance of heroes in a world not their own. Even here, cinematography lingers not only on the task, but on the personal. One man confronting his father, another peering longingly at the woman he lost. Vormir, the desolate planet of sacrifice, remains one of the most haunting settings in the saga. Its jagged cliffs, perpetual twilight, and eerie stillness create an atmosphere of inevitability. The cinematography leans into wide shots, framing the two friends against vast landscapes, emphasizing their smallness against destiny. When one falls, silence dominates. The setting itself seems to mourn. The barren world becomes not just a backdrop, but a participant, its emptiness amplifying the enormity of the sacrifice. The climax unfolds on the ruins of the hero's compound, transformed into a cratered battlefield. Fire, rubble, and dust dominate the screen. The cinematography here is raw, handheld at times, chaotic in framing, capturing the disorientation of survival. Within this ruin, we transition into the most iconic setting, the battlefield surrounding the enemy's army, anchored by the destroyed remains of their base. Here, the cinematography expands, using sweeping wide shots to emphasize scale, then tightening into close-ups for intimacy. The battlefield is desolate, but it becomes fertile ground for unity, as portals open and armies pour forth. The golden glow of magic tears through sterile blues, transforming a wasteland into a stage of hope. The funeral sequence encapsulated the scale of the production's secrecy. Nearly every surviving hero appears in one long, silent shot, standing in reverence. For months, fans speculated whether the image was digitally stitched together. In truth, it was filmed in one take. Dozens of actors were flown in under tight secrecy, their arrivals disguised, their presence concealed even from parts of the crew. On the day of filming, they gathered together for the first time, standing shoulder to shoulder in silence. The cast later described the moment as surreal, like attending a real memorial. Some confessed they were overwhelmed, not only mourning the character whose story had ended, but also saying goodbye to a chapter of their own lives. Technology shaped performances in unexpected ways. The God of Thunder's physical transformation into a heavier, broken figure was achieved not with CGI, but with an elaborate prosthetic suit. The suit added significant weight, altering his posture and movement, forcing the actor to embody vulnerability. He described it as freeing, liberating him from the traditional expectation of power and allowing him to lean into humor, sadness, and insecurity. Between takes, he often cracked jokes about his new physique, snacking with exaggerated theatrics that left the crew in stitches. What could have been a source of discomfort became a source of camaraderie. The Hammer's long-awaited moment was another story of secrecy and triumph. For years, fans speculated whether the soldier might be worthy. During early script readings, the scene where he finally wields it was omitted or disguised, even from the cast. When filming finally took place, the set erupted in applause. Crew members, usually professional and quiet, broke into cheers. It wasn't just a payoff for fans. It was a reward for everyone who had lived alongside these characters for a decade. The Green Giant's transformation into a synthesis of intellect and strength was another fascinating production choice. For years, visual effects teams had struggled to balance the monster's raw power with the scientist's inner humanity. Here, they created a hybrid through cutting-edge performance capture. The actor spent hours covered in sensors, his facial expressions meticulously mapped to ensure subtlety. The result was a character who could deliver humor and tenderness, even while towering over others. It was groundbreaking technology, but what made it resonate was not the innovation alone. It was the way it allowed vulnerability to shine through. Improvisation became a hidden ingredient. Many of the film's most beloved lines weren't in the script. The Armor Genius's final declaration, "I am Iron Man," was a late addition filmed during reshoots after directors realized the scene needed closure. Other moments, like the banter between returning heroes and the chaos of battle, were improvised in the moment. Even small gestures, like the Armor Genius pulling the young protege into an embrace mid-battle, weren't scripted but sprang from instinct. These unscripted touches added authenticity, grounding spectacle in humanity. The final battle itself was perhaps the production's greatest challenge. Much of it was filmed on sound stages, flat expanses of dirt surrounded by green walls. The sprawling armies, the collapsing structures, the chaos of the battlefield all existed only in the imaginations of the cast. Directors encouraged the actors to treat it like childhood play. "Pretend you're surrounded," they said. "Pretend you're standing on the edge of history." And they did. Months later, visual effects teams across the globe layered in thousands of digital soldiers, ships, and explosions, creating a battlefield from fragments of imagination. Even accidents became gifts. In one scene, a set piece collapsed earlier than expected, startling the cast. Their genuine scramble and shouts were captured on film, later woven into the final cut. In another, a line was flubbed, but the improvised recovery was so natural it was kept. These imperfections gave the film texture, reminding us that even myth is built from mistakes. The gauntlet, centerpiece of the climax, existed in multiple versions. Some were heavy metal, built for close-ups. Others were lightweight rubber, used in action sequences. Still others existed only digitally, created in post-production. Actors often joked about how odd it felt to treat a prop as the axis of destiny. One admitted he would sneak photos of himself wearing it, even though phones were banned. For him, slipping it on felt like wearing history. The global campaign surrounding the film's release was as unusual as its production. The directors personally pleaded with audiences not to spoil the ending, launching the Don't Spoil the Endgame campaign. Remarkably, fans complied. In an age of constant leaks and instant spoilers, this collective silence became its own kind of ritual. Audiences stepped into theaters knowing little, allowing themselves to be swept away. For the cast, saying goodbye was deeply personal. Many had spent over a decade inhabiting these roles. Several admitted they wept on their last day of filming, hugging crew members they had worked with for years. Some quietly took props home, shields, helmets, small tokens of memory. Others found themselves unable to watch the finished film immediately, the emotions too raw. For them, this was not just the end of a story, but the end of a chapter of their lives. Looking back, what's most striking about the production is its fragility. Any number of things could have gone wrong: leaks, scheduling conflicts, technological failures. And yet, through improvisation, secrecy, and sheer determination, it came together. The finished film feels inevitable, but behind the curtain, it was anything but. It was laughter over prosthetic suits, improvised lines saved in editing, trailers built on misdirection, actors reacting to tennis balls where armies should have been. The fun facts and insights don't diminish the myth, they enrich it.